So we're coming to the end of the retreat, and this is the final closing session. So give a closing talk, and then we will do some blessing chants after that, and then you can ask forgiveness and take the 5 precepts, which is traditional at the end of a retreat. And then after that, I might say a few more closing words, final talk. So we always get the question, how can we practice in our daily life? So I think it's just like the story of my friend who works at Chevron, and he was able to not react with anger to the CFO who was yelling at him. And that had a very profound effect on her life. And so anything we do, we just remember these techniques and these ways of practice, and we can use them. They can have quite a good effect on all the people around us, quite a good effect on the world. And we can't really know how good the effect is. So like, I might give a talk at a Bayagiri, and I might look at the YouTube channel. I wonder like, oh, how many people watched my talk? And then I might see like, oh, more people watched Ajahn Chunda's talk, and I might feel bad about that. Maybe he's more popular. But then say there's 500 people, and on YouTube, 500 is not a very big number. You want like, 1 million people. That's like a good number on YouTube for people to watch something. So, but for Dhamma, you might say like, oh, well, 500. And if it's Ajahn Siripanyo, maybe it's like 1.6K or something or more. And if it's Ajahn Sucitto, maybe it's like 30K, and Bhikkhu Bodhi, maybe even more than that. But then even if it's only 500, if it's only 400, 500, you don't know of those 500 people who it affected. Actually, maybe 20 or 30 of those are probably just bots that tick the number up, but it wasn't actually real people watching it. So maybe you had 450 or 470 people actually watching it. And of those people, maybe you had half who watched the entire talk. So then you don't know how many of those people, what type of effect it had on them. And maybe they talked to their friends about it, or maybe it caused them to want to keep the precepts and change their behavior. And so one person like that, if out of 500 people who watch a Dhamma talk, if one person changes their behavior, that's considered quite a good percentage. And then they might influence a few of their friends or their family. And little by little, then we end up having a say. We end up having a part to play in the world, in how things play out in the world. So it's like, imagine if the Buddha never got enlightened at the Bodhi tree, how much different world history would have been. So even one person, the Buddha, doing something amazing, reaching the deathless under the Bodhi tree, 2,500, more than 2,500, and the number 2,566, it's not clear exactly what that comes from. That could be from the Enlightenment, or it could be his birth, or it could be his Nibbana. I can't remember. But about 2,600 years ago, the Bodhisattva coming into the world, and about 2,566 years ago, the Buddha reaching enlightenment, and still having an effect today. And you had great practitioners like Lungpo Man and Ajahn Chah, and having a great effect on the world. So you look at somebody like Lungpo Cha and the effect that he had on Thailand. If you just talk about Thailand, and we don't even have to talk about the whole world, because he had Western disciples, and somebody like Lumpur Sumedho, who really went through great difficulties in order to plant deep roots of Buddha Dhamma in Europe and America, actually, because actually Abhayagiri really comes from Luangpur Sumedho, even though he sent Ajahn Amaro to go really be the one to start it. And it really comes from Luangpur Sumedho. And Luangpur Sumedho comes from Luangpur Cha, and Luangpur Cha comes from the Buddha. So it all comes from the Buddha. So it's quite amazing that we have this, and that we can, every single practitioner, we might have a feeling like, oh, I'm not a very good practitioner, I'm not having much of a impact on the world. But actually, every single person, it adds up to having a big impact. And so this is very important. We actually do have a part to play. We do actually have a say in world history, how it plays out. And I think it's always going to tend towards entropy. The word entropy refers to, it's like anichang, the world is always, and sudam, it's always going down as a trend, but at least we can kind of keep it up a little bit, and it cannot go down as fast. So the ship is already sinking, but actually we're as practitioners, we're taking water and bailing the water out so that it sinks more slowly. So us following virtue is like that. When we practice, we do have a good effect on the world, but we're not going to save the world. The world is always there's always going to be kilate. In the end, Mara, Man is the owner. Man is the owner of the world. It's like a Man ben jiao kong lok. So we can't ever make the world a perfect place. And one monk, Ajahn Punadamo, he's a hermit monk in our tradition, and he said, samsara, trying to make samsara perfect is like arranging the chairs on the Titanic. So it's like you're arranging everything, trying to make it perfect, but the ship is going down. So it's not going to make much difference trying to make samsara a perfect place. But we can follow virtue and make good kamma. That's what's important. We can't make the world perfect, but we can develop a sense of contentment and well-being within the world. Or like we can actually rise above the world. That's very important. And the world and samsara, when we go about our daily lives and we're not in retreat, we will be coming into contact with praise and criticism and what we call like lokatam bad. So it's like praise and blame, status and loss of status, gain and loss, pleasure and pain. We come into contact with all of these things. And this is dhammada, this is very normal. So we have to remember that vata songsan, samsara, has many faults. Like there's many things wrong with it. It's not a perfect place. There's good, but the bad goes along with it. So it's never going to be perfect. So even things like friendships, the best friendships eventually come to an end, or the best relationships eventually come to an end, just like life comes to an end. So we have to remember that, and then we can, like the bodhisattva, the intoxication with life can pass away. And we know, we're very sober, so we know, oh yeah, friendships do end and we make new friendships, or relationships do end and we make new relationships. This is one of what we call a pit prat ne wata songsan. It's like the defect of samsara. It's why we can never find true happiness in samsara. We actually have to rise above it. So that's very important to try to remember. There's a quote from because I have kamma with Tibetan Buddhism, so sometimes I remember these quotes from Tibetan monks. And there's the 7th Dalai Lama. So His Holiness the 7th Dalai Lama, who lived maybe 500 years ago. He was known as being a great teacher, a great Dhamma teacher. And there's a monk in Tibet, Pabonka Rinpoche, who lived maybe 100 years ago. And I've read a lot of his teachings. And he said one time he was Vientiane, he was circumambulating at a shrine, and he found a piece of paper, a ripped piece of paper on the ground. And it was a teaching from the 7th Dalai Lama. And he was just this kind of scrap of paper. And so we never know when we're going to find some Dhamma. And he read it, and the paper said, the bee flies from flower to flower looking for good nectar. Having gone to one flower, it flies to the next and the next. And the meaning is this: samsara is full of difficulties, and life is very short. And having had many different experiences, I can say I've never found a lasting friend. So it's like this, like salot sangwait. It's this reflection on samsara. So we never know when we're going to find some Dhamma treasure like that. Or like Luang Cha would say that he practiced so hard, and he tried so many different ways of practice. And he said what it came down to was you can practice to any level that you want. Like if you just want to be happier, you can have sati sampajanya, you can meditate a little bit every day and your life will be better. But for himself, he wanted the final goal. He wanted Nibbana, he wanted Magpan Nibbana. And so he said for that, it's necessary to put your life on the line, and you have to die before you die. So everything you were before has to fall away. And he said he reached a certain point where just his whole life was just one day and one night. So if we're able to practice like that, that's the best way to practice. We aim high, so we can use that to give ourselves gamlang jai. We can think about Luang Por Cha and how great he was. And he had many health problems. So actually his body, sometimes it didn't have enough energy, and he had knee pain and different problems, but he still practiced so hard. So it shows us that it is possible. Sometimes we might feel like, oh, I have too much back pain, I have too much knee pain, I was too sick this year. But then if we think about Luang Por Cha, he probably had more of all of that than we've been dealing with, than most of us deal with. So Luang Por Cha was somebody who showed us that it is possible to practice in any situation. So as long as we keep the precepts, if we don't keep the precepts, there's no guarantee. But as long as we keep the precepts, that's like the ground we stand on. That's the baseline. That's the puntan. So as long as we do that, then like Ajahn Jayasaro said, we can always find an opportunity to practice as long as we're keeping the precepts. So wish everybody well, and hope you had a nice retreat and a nice time and had some good experiences during this retreat. And we'll just do a few parita chants as a blessing, and then we can continue on from there. So I'll start by calling the devas, even though they're probably already here. We'll call them anyway. Prapeni. But one thing that's good to remember about the 5 precepts that you just took is the Buddha talked about that as something called abhayadana, the offering of fearlessness. And why is that an offering of fearlessness? And there's a teaching about this where the Buddha says, when you don't kill living beings, you offer fearlessness to all living beings who you come into contact with, who would otherwise possibly their life might be in danger if you didn't hold that precept. So you offer fearlessness to uncountable living beings. And it makes, when you really hold that precept, it makes a vast, measureless store of merit that you can't really just say it's this much or that much. Only you can say it's a vast quantity. And then the same for if you refrain from taking what is not given, so you refrain from stealing, then you offer fearlessness to all living beings, all other people who come into contact with you. They won't have to guard their possessions. They know you're not going to steal them. They don't have to put their money in a safe around you because they know you're not going to make off with all their money. And the third precept, refraining from sexual misconduct, your relationships, integrity in your relationships, then you know your partner have a understanding that not going to cheat on each other. And so there's a lot more happiness and a lot more well-being and a lot more peace in a relationship like that. Then there's the refraining from false and harmful speech, refraining from lying. So people don't have to be afraid that you're going to lie to them. So we offer fearlessness to other people when we are honest with our speech. And when we're very honest and we don't lie, we're also incorruptible. So corruption is something that's very common in the world. And it's something I think about, like, how does corruption happen? Like you hear about corrupt people in the government, for example, who maybe take payoffs in order to get ahead, or even in a place like India, this is totally normal. Like you just bribe the right people to get what you want. And so corruption, so if we're completely honest and we're incorruptible, but how does corruption happen? It's very interesting to think about, because I would think most people, when they're young, they don't aspire to, I'm going to be a corrupt politician when I grow up. I'm going to, that's my aspiration. Or like people aren't going to think like, I'm going to be a corrupt police chief. Like when they're a kid, they're not thinking that. But corruption happens little by little and we don't notice it. So it happens a little bit and we're a little bit dishonest here and a little bit dishonest there. And then slowly the corruption creeps in. It's like an infection that we didn't think was serious. And so we ignored it and we don't deal with it right away. And if we don't deal with it when it's small, by the time it's big, it's too big to deal with. So then somebody might find themselves like 50, 60 years old, and they're some sort of high up official in the government, completely corrupt. And they might think, how did this happen? Now I'm stuck here now. I'm stuck in this position. There's nothing I can do about it. It's like the tumor has grown too large and it can't be cut out. So we have to watch for corruption creeping in and then cut it out as soon as it happens, like right away, not to wait until it gets too big. And that can happen with our precepts as well. They can go corrupt in little ways and then it's big later. So we have to be careful. Have to be careful about that. But that speech rule, being very honest, that protects us from corruption. And those first four precepts, they protect us from making bad karma as well. So we make a certain amount of good karma. And the fifth precept, it's not actually bad karma to drink alcohol or do drugs. But the problem with that is the Buddha has this precept because when we drink or do drugs, it causes us to break all the other four precepts. It causes us to not have mindfulness. It causes us to be heedless. It causes us to brahmat. So it causes us to break the other four. So it can be a very strong cause for making a lot of bad karma, even though, say, drinking alcohol in and of itself is not bad karma, but it can be dangerous. So, or if you think about driving while you're drinking or on drugs, that can be very dangerous. So this is a protection. So sila is the best protection for us for this life. And the three refuges also. So we take the precepts but we also, before that, we take the refuges, and that's trying to make sure that that's where we turn when we have maybe some sort of trouble. Like I talked about a bit earlier in the retreat, where does our mind turn to when there's trouble or some sort of big major difficulty in our life? Where do we go for help? So when we have some sort of suffering or somebody has done something wrong to us, where do we go for help? And if we've taken refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, then we might bow before our Buddha shrine in our house and actually ask for help from the Buddha. I know I do that a lot at the monastery, and I almost always get an answer like immediately, like, oh, just let go, or, oh, just don't make a problem out of it. Like some answer will come, and just that intention of asking for help from Buddha Dhamma Sangha can be very helpful. It's not necessarily the case that the Buddha's answering, but it's maybe causing our own wisdom to come up and to answer. So, so these five precepts lead very much to their apaya dana, and it's actually a higher form of dana than giving material things. So there's the giving of regular material things. That's the watu dana or amisa dana. There's the abhaya dana, the giving of forgiveness. There's the dhamma dana, the giving of dhamma. So these are all good things. But the abhaya dana, it's pretty high up there. Yeah. So again, that's just a reflection on the 5 precepts, just as a reminder. And I do truly wish everyone well in your way, and hope we all meet again at some point, maybe either in Thailand or America or somewhere, India. We don't know. And yeah, I'll leave it there for the reflections.